Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's close enough to 1 o'clock that we can start the hearing, which is number 30.1, rezoning submissions for Rolleston. And just before I hear from the first submitter, just a couple of procedural issues or one procedural issue. And a technical issue. Just had some kind of weird vocal feedback going on. So Commissioner Hassan has recused herself from the first 2 days of this particular hearing due to the conflict of interest. Now, just from the 42A. Sort of. Okay, so from the 42A reporting team, anything for our attention before we hear from submitters? Okay, Ms. Appleyard, over to you. Just one thing before you start, I think we indicated there were a small number of witnesses that we didn't have any questions for in response to Ms. Forrester's request for us to do that. So are you able just at the start to confirm these witnesses who won't be appearing in person?
Yes, so
Correct?
Mr. Fuller, you have questions for which I have the answer
Yes.
to that question, which I'll find out shortly.
Yes, that's already been provided to us, so thank you for that. Yep.
He is available if you want. If you've changed your mind.
Yep.
Mr. Jones.
Yep.
Mr. Lopez.
And then also Mr. Fuller, since he's answered the one question we had. Yep, that coincides with my list, so that's great.
Okay.
All right.
Right. I'm conscious that I have got some legal submissions that you have read. And what I proposed to do was probably to deal with the one which I call pretty fundamental legal issue, which is the council position, as I understand it, that submissions on this process are redundant, superseded, or ought to be rejected, which I interpret to be a fundamental jurisdictional issue about the ability of this panel to hear and determine submissions on the proposed plan, because at the time that they were lodged, we didn't have an enabling act and they didn't incorporate the PRS. I consider that to be a fairly fundamental legal issue. I don't know whether the council has had any legal advice on it, and I don't know whether the position in the officers report or the panel or not. So I am flying a little bit blind. So I would like to take you through that. I'm taking a positive cue from the fact we are here, because not only for this hearing, there is obviously considerable cost, a large number of witnesses, and I have a number of rezoning hearings coming up.
Yeah.
And if I'm in the wrong process and those submissions are superseded, ought to be made rendered redundant, or ought to be rejected, I'd really like to know that now before we start putting submissions through a very lengthy process of cost. Tied into this, if I can just, I'm not wanting to be difficult about it, this process has an appeal, the variation process does not. We have filed evidence in response to the panels, all of the panels' directions as early as August last year. Huge amount of time and cost has gone into that. The section 42A has decided not to respond to any of that evidence. That is very concerning to us, particularly in this case when we've been through plan changes 73, 81 and 82. So all of the evidence was prepared and could have been picked up and given to the panel in this process. So there are some pretty fundamental concerns there. And if we're all wasting our time, we would probably really need to be told that now. I note that later on the week, we're hearing from Mr. Cleary and Mr. Thompson. And in a similar sort of way, they raise the same issue. Mr. Thompson would like a substantive decision on rezoning. I'm not asking for that, but what I am asking for is a steer on jurisdiction.
Yep.
I'm not asking you to tell me what the answer is for this particular piece of land, but I'd like to know that I'm in the right process.
Yep. So I might just pause for a minute while I have a very quick discussion with my fellow panel members.
Thank you.
So, Ms. Appleyard, just to answer your question, we agree it is a fundamental matter, so happy to clear it up now. In this particular case, and other cases may or may not be different, they'll each be considered individually, given that this block of land that's the subject of the rezoning request is outside of variation 1 and hasn't been zoned MRZ by variation 1. We feel that we do have an obligation to consider the appropriateness or not of residential zoning for this block of land on the merits based on the evidence in front of us.
Yeah, thank you. That's the answer I was hoping that you would give. I appreciate that in other pieces of land it might be different. In this particular asset, applicant has some land at Lincoln that has been included by the council and as a new residential zone, and I definitely saw the juxtaposition between the two of those. I think there's a serious issue about scope for us to run a Me Too submission in the variation. And at this time, I probably do need to say at this stage, which the Section 42A officer needs to reflect on this, is depending on how this hearing goes, we may well consider whether we need to maintain our submission on the variation at all. Which creates some problems for the council in terms of evidence that it hasn't brought to this hearing, particularly on reverse sensitivity issues in urban form, that if we don't appear at the variation hearing, or we withdraw our submission on that, there wouldn't be the opportunity to address that. So I thought, in fairness, I should be raising that. It's a problem more for council than it is for us. But there should not be reliance placed on us turning up at the variation hearing or maintaining our submission, given the indication you just have given that you consider you have jurisdiction to determine the fundamental issue of rezoning from rural to residential in this hearing.
Appreciate that's a matter for you to consider in consultation with your client, but I guess at this stage you might be well advised to maintain your position on variation 1, just out of abundance of caution.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but I just need to make the fundamental point, and obviously you'll alert to it, that this rezoning submission will be determined on the evidence that you will hear in this hearing, not evidence in other plan changes or anticipated to be called in the variation, and on the basis of the evidence that you'll hear. And with the exception of Mr. Lightbody from the City Council, we have no other evidence. And we don't have a substantive Section 42A report that analyses the evidence, which does place all of us, and in particular the panel, in a difficult position in terms of testing the evidence that you'll hear.
We appreciate that, and it's a very messy situation. The plan change decisions are a separate process made by an independent commissioner who's not on our panel, and the media and variation 1 will be considered by a quite different panel under a different suite of legislative requirements. So it's messy. What I do know is that council's intention is to release decisions on the proposed district plan and decisions on variation 1 at the same time.
I think that the difficulty is, and it's not a matter for here, I wasn't going to dwell on it now, given your indication is that there are some live questions around the scope of variation 1. Not only in relation to Me Too submissions, but in relation to whether it's just dealing with the intensification aspect. So taking this land, for example, even if we are in scope, is it considering just the density of residential zoning? Or if we turn up at that hearing, is it everything from rural right through to MDRS? So there are some pretty fundamental scope issues. And they're unlikely or possibly not going to get determined just in the Selwyn context. I know there is a lot of commentary around the country around the scope of these variations. So it might get determined somewhere by somebody else in a process that we're not involved in. So I'm just wanting to keep all the options open. Just picking up on your other point then about other plan change processes and other decisions. obviously, as I've traversed in the submissions, we had Commissioner Cobol's decision in PC 73. And the panel will be aware that on Friday night we received a recommendation from Commissioner Thomas in relation to PC 81 and 82. I don't know whether you've had a chance to have a look at that in a significant amount of detail. I am happy to deal with this in two ways. Either I can take you through it now, or we can perhaps hear from Mr. Phillips tomorrow, who is going to analyse it. And then if I need to file some supplementary legals dealing with it, I could do it at the end. If I do it now and you haven't read it in advance, it is going to be a page 10 exercise, which could be a little bit painful. So the long and short of it is that Commissioner Thomas said the operative plan has, he's very optimistic, 6 to 18 months to go. What is the point in him determining this rezoning, given the very short life of the operative plan? Passing the ball to you as a panel, saying all of this is going to be resolved in the proposed plan process. And what's more, what you have in front of you is the land subject to various piecemeal plan changes, 73, 81 and 82, and anyone else seeking rezoning, all arriving in front of you at once. And therefore it would be much better to deal with it holistically. That's my summary of it. I'm happy to take you through it now, but if you'd rather wait to hear from Mr. Phillips, and if I've got to have a proper opportunity for you to read it perhaps overnight and then deal with it tomorrow, that may be better if you hadn't had a chance to read it yet.
Yeah, we'll go with option 2, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Well, on that basis, there may not be much more in my legal submissions than I need to take you through. They were the two sort of primary issues. I'm happy to answer any questions if you want me to, or to take you through a summary of it. Probably the fundamental point to make is the one I agree with Commissioner Thomas. This is a unique opportunity that you have that other decision makers haven't had, because you have all of the land west of Duns Crossing Road, in fact, all of the land in Rolleston subject to rezoning requests in front of you. So this is an opportunity that other decision makers haven't had. And the evidence that you're hearing today is presented holistically. It's not piecemeal either. So this is not the same case that other commissioners have heard.
Yep, no, we appreciate that. Well, I think we're happy if we go to questions. As you say, we've read the legal submissions, so thank you for that. And as you can see, in terms of dealing with the jurisdictional issue that you raised, obviously we have read it and given it some thought. So I think we'll go to questions. And Lindsay, any questions? Exactly.
No, I don't. I think you've traversed what's been in my mind as well about the, if you like, the key nuances between the variation process, which is coming ahead, this previous plan changes, the extensive amount of evidence that's been presented on those, some of which is getting transferred through or amended, if you like. So, no, look, I don't have any specific legal matters here. We'll see how we get on during.
Yeah, I think it makes life easy for us if you're considering a rezoning of a block of land. You put the other decisions aside and you look at the evidence that's in front of you. I think that is the correct way to approach this, and I think it makes our life easier. And we will just have to park any assumptions being made about whether we're going to appear later at the variation. You will have seen the evidence about the market's response to intensification in Rolleston and whether that's likely to be attractive to the market or not. So the primary submission that my client is wanting to pursue is to get the land zone from rural to residential of some sort. Whether it pursues the variation part is another issue.
Okay. Just to follow up on one thing you said, are you saying we should disregard completely the plan change 81, 82?
Some of the comments, some of the legal comments in there around the approach to this process, I don't have a difficulty with that. Where I would have a difficulty is there was a whole lot of evidence given in that hearing on urban form and on odour from council witnesses, and those witnesses aren't in front of you. So I think the part you can't deal with is the findings on the evidence on those issues, findings on evidence. There are some legal matters in here that I think Commissioner Thomas may well be right on, and I'm quite happy to point those out to you and say, well, here's another decision maker that reached this decision on interpretation issues. I think findings on the evidence is a different matter, and I don't think you can go there on that.
But we can make findings on your evidence.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, well, it's obviously it's a well-founded procedural matter that we make decisions based on the evidence before us, not on the evidence presented in other fora that we haven't been a party to.
Thank you.
So I just had one question and one substantive question, and just a little, I think there might be one typo in one paragraph, but just at your paragraph 6.
Yes.
And in the first sentence there, council is not meeting its requirements of providing at least sufficient development capacity. I was just wondering the context you had in mind when you wrote that. Were you thinking short term, medium term, long term, or all of the above?
This is actually an issue that was raised in PC 82. For the purposes of this evidence, it's the medium and long term. So probably what's confusing in that sentence is the word currently at the start of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it should be currently it's not meeting its requirements of providing at least sufficient development capacity under use in the short, medium and long term.
Oh, so you want to say short, medium,
Yeah, and long term. Yeah, and I'll get the witnesses to comment on that. Obviously the focus in this is on the medium.
Yeah. And just at para 10, just above the diagram.
Yes, at the G, it should be GRUZ. Yep. Is that the one you were picking up?
Yeah. Okay. And I think that's all we have for you. Thanks.
Thank you. So we have our 2 odor witnesses.
Yes.
And they are both appearing.
I think one of them's here.
So that's Mr. Van Kempen and Mr. Sally.
Yes, can we just give Mr. Van Keekum a call? We're just a little bit ahead of where I thought
Yeah,
they might be. And actually what I'd quite like to do is have them both at the same time.
We're not going to run out of time, so that's fine.
No. Yeah. Do you just want to do you want to Lucy go and see if you can call them? No, all right. Given I didn't take an hour for my legal submissions, is there anyone from tomorrow you'd like to hear from this afternoon, or would you just like us to stick with who we've indicated for this afternoon? And okay, I'll see what else we can do. Yeah, we'll just go and see what we can do. We'll get Mr. Van Keekum and Mr. Isley underway, and then we'll see what we can do about bringing some others forward. We can't get, no one got back to return. He's the one to know his name.
Oh yeah, no, I could get.
Okay. Mr. Van Keekum is driving here. He's about 15 minutes away. Do you want to start with Mr. Azali, or would you like to wait until the 2 of them are here together?
Yeah.
Do you want to just, I mean, I'm okay, so sorry. It's not usually happens like this. We go faster rather than slower. So do you want to park Mr. Azali for 15 minutes till Mr. Van Keekum gets here? Yeah. Okay. All right. All right. John, did you hear that?
Sorry, that's be unmuted now. Yes, hello everyone. I did hear that. Thank you.
John, the commissioners are indicating they don't have any questions for you. So you're quite welcome to stay on and listen to Mr. Van Keekum. He's about 15 minutes away. He's driving out here.
All right, thank you. Yes, I'll listen to what Donovan has to say, but thank you for that.
Thank you. So we'll just have to wait for Mr. Van Keekum to get here, sorry. And we'll use the time to just go and see if we can rattle some of these others up, if that's all right. Yeah. Yeah, you can read PC 81. summary of Mr. Van Keekham's evidence, but if you just want to crack into questions, we're happy with that as well.
I think since we've read the evidence, we're probably happy to crack into questions, but I'll
Okay.
just check. Would either of you wish the summary to be read out loud to us? Would you?
No, I sometimes find summary useful. There's a feeling.
Yeah, the summaries are usually useful when you've got other parties to respond to, but
Sorry,
here,
sorry, Ms. Eppiard, I'm just talking to my panel members, so. Can you wish the summary to be read out? And so, no.
No.
Okay. So yes, we've read the evidence and including the summary with
Yep.
evidence in chief and rebuttal. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And so now we're just happy to go to questions, and Commissioner Solomon will go first. So Raymond, if you want to ask questions, evidence in chief first, and then any questions on rebuttal following that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Van Keekham. Can I turn you to the windrows, the page with the, I think it's paragraph 33. Where you talked about a Tegel breeder farm. Where is that located on the map? Which block is that located on?
So that's on the PC 82,
82.
and you'll, I think you'll be able to see a bunch of like shed-like figures or sort of buildings, and they're sort of evenly distributed from West Duns Crossing Road. I think in figure one, you'll see the little red markers on top of them.
Yes. Is that where the sheds are?
Yes, so they're all sheds that contain chickens.
Okay. Now can we go to your windrows map, please? Your windrows, I think it's called a windrows.
Yes, figure 2.
Figure 2. And could you just explain a little bit about how that's working? Like, for instance, I can't see where Oda could, it doesn't mark where Oda could reach that first property marked R.
Yeah, so a windrose is a depiction of wind speed and wind direction. So the long bars represent the direction by sort of predominant wind directions. So in Canterbury, we generally have predominant northeasterly winds. So you can see the longer bars coming from the northeastern direction, and then we sort of have a less dominant wind directions coming from the southwest, which is associated with the cold fronts that we often have here in Canterbury. So those bars are just there, or that windrose is overlaid over this figure to show an indication of the dominant wind directions and speeds that would direct odour from the source. So it's overlaid over the top of the source, being the composting operation. So in this instance, the dominant northeasterly winds would blow odours from the source towards unoccupied land. And then the sort of minor dominant southwesterlies would blow it up towards, I guess, the PC 73 block. So the bars that are overlaid there are not showing the extent of the odour plume, they're just showing the general wind directions. Yeah.
Okay. Can we go to your paragraph 41 as well, please? You've talked about some figures, and I've combined both figures and they come to 24%. So does that mean 24% of the time odour carrying winds will blow towards the WDCR land?
So are you adding up both 41 and 42? So
Yes.
that's the southwesterly winds and the west through northwesterly winds. Yes, so if you would add that 14% plus the 10%, then that would be the total frequency that wind would blow towards either of those parties combined, or areas of land.
Okay, thank you. And now to your paragraph 60. explain how porous grounds means that leachate does not need to be collected and treated?
For the same reason that the wastewater treatment plant is able to irrigate the treated wastewater directly to land.
Yeah.
Across the Canterbury Plains areas where there's basically stony ground underneath. So when you apply water to the surface of the land, it's very permeable. So the water will go down through the base course that sits underneath that land. So that same land or subsurface structure it occurs over the composting plant. So when rain falls on the composting piles and it sloughs off the top and hits the tracks in between the composting piles, it generally leaches straight into the ground or goes straight to groundwater. There is some contouring of the land that heads towards soak pits. So if you're not familiar with the concept of a soak pit, it's essentially a big hole that's bored into the ground and it's filled with large boulders, and that helps to facilitate any stormwater going down into basically into the subsurface.
Did you say that sometimes leachate can reach groundwater?
That's not my area of expertise, but my understanding is that the composting operation has stormwater consents and the like, so they will be tightly regulated that they can't discharge leachate to groundwater. That would be very not an ideal scenario.
Okay, thank you. My last one is, do you know how often upset conditions have occurred at the plant?
That would be a question for the operator. I am unaware as to how frequently upset conditions may have occurred in the past. From my observations, having visited the site a couple of times, the operation was really well run. So I wouldn't expect that upset conditions would be a common occurrence at this operation.
Right, thank you. No more questions. No.
Thank you, Mr. Van Hecken. I don't have a lot of questions. Prior to you arriving, Ms. Appleyard gave us a copy of the plan change 81-82 recommendation from Commissioner Thomas, which was received on Friday. I haven't been through the whole thing, but just while you were arriving, I did notice one matter that Mr. Thomas makes the view that 1,000-metre dwelling setback is will be preferable from the active composting area. I'm just going from his overall conclusion.
Yes.
Now the plans, the urban design plans or the outline development plans and so forth have 600 metres, I understand, from it. Can you just fill me in with some of the background between the 600 and 8,000 from your perspective?
So the 600 metre was proposed by the applicant. So my assessment's based on whether or not a 600 metre separation distance or buffer distance is going to be sufficient to not result in reverse sensitivity effects on council's infrastructure. So you'll have seen through my evidence that my overall conclusion is that 600 metres is sufficient, given all of the reasons that I've outlaid in my evidence. The 1,000 metre setback distance has in that PC 81-82 hearing was an amalgamation of a variety of different air quality experts' opinions. So there is published separation distances, the most conservative being 2,000 metres, the least conservative being 200 metres. The sort of a conservative approach that was adopted by council's experts was that 1,000 metres would be appropriate. And that differed to my professional opinion and that of Mr. Azali's. So that's where that 1,000 metres has come from.
Okay. We're obviously, and there was no changes in relation to the wastewater treatment plant, the setback, the dotted line, etc., in terms of the odor experts, that was considered to be appropriate.
Yeah, so for all of the odor experts, agreed that a 1,000 metre separation distance from the wastewater treatment plant operations was going to be appropriate, and because all of the, the west of Duns Crossing, PC 73, 81, 82 were all outside of that 1,000 metres, then there was an appropriate separation between those odor sources and the development.
That confirms my evidence my reading of the evidence before us. Obviously, this has become an issue of the composting operations and the appropriateness of it in relation to potentially a number of residential properties at, say, 15 households a hectare, or potentially more if there's intensification. Is it true that the propensity for complaint increases with the numbers of people in closer proximity to the source of the odour?
That's something that's been debated at length across a number of these hearings. My opinion is that for a reverse sensitivity effect to occur, you only essentially need to have one complaint that's validated by council. And so whether or not you have 10 or 20 or 30 complaints versus one, I believe that there would still be a reverse sensitivity effect if one was to be confirmed and by council as being offensive or objectionable versus 20. Whether or not you have an increase in the potential for that one complaint if you have more receptors there is another question altogether, and that comes down to the sensitivity of that receiving environment to odour. At times we talk about hypersensitive individuals. There's quite a wide range in the olfactory response of different humans, and so there are individuals who are a lot more sensitive to odour and can pick up odour at much lower concentrations than the average person. And then there are also people for their variety of reasons that are more sensitive to different character of an odour. So there are certain cultures who will find certain types of odours to be very offensive, whereas other cultures will find them less offensive. So when we're looking at, as a part of my assessment, I've looked at the sensitivity of these receiving environments, particularly the more densely populated environments, and they have been classified in accordance with the Ministry for Good Practice Guide as being a high sensitivity environment. So for me, I've classified, and my assessment is based on individuals within that area beyond 600 metres being highly sensitive to odour of this character. Notwithstanding that, we have a no complaints covenant that's been proposed by the applicant. And in my professional opinion, having a no complaints covenant that's across those titles will notify particularly people that are very sensitive to either the character of that type of odour that might come from a composting plant, or the sort of intensity if you are somebody who was very affected by odours or found odour to be really offensive, even at low concentrations. It would be my expectation that somebody reading that title would say, well, this is not a property that I want to purchase. So, and although it's not, my opinions are not bound by that statement, it's a commonality in my opinion that people who are hypersensitive to odours of the character and nature would be less inclined to purchase and or live in that property or that zone.
Now, you've obviously looked at odour producing issues from a number of sites around the country. Is it common for those sites, particularly where there is land within the ownership of one developer, as the case here, to offer a no complaints covenant? The reason why I ask is that, yes, it's a nice clean thing, the developer put the no complaints covenant in, and then people will buy the properties as they see fit, and then that's enduring. But that land is always going to be, if it is zoned residential, it's always going to be zoned residential. People will change, houses will sell. Is it the most appropriate mechanism to deal with reverse sensitivity alongside the conditions of consent that such a facility operates on? Is it widely used for dealing with these sorts of issues?
In my experience, I do air discharge consents and these types of things
Sorry,
every
can you
day of the
speak
week.
up a bit?
Oh, sorry. In my experience, that no complaints covenants are becoming more common. It seems to be sort of it's not a happy middle ground, but it's an additional mitigation measure that various applicants are offering to reduce the potential for effect particularly from odour and dust discharging activities. So that, that being aside, that would be, I had one other point that was raised by your question. I can't quite recall it now.
Well, I think you've covered it. There is an acceptable mechanism that is getting more frequently used, but I guess there is also the contrary perspective in terms of no complaints covenants that they the developer can impose them, and then the developer's gone, and then there's a whole lot of individual properties who may be sold in the future, and people may feel that they are more limited than they would otherwise be if there wasn't a no complaints covenant.
I mean, my experience has been that they stay on the title. So I guess most people who are purchasing a new property will have advice from their legal counsel as to the various restrictions on the property. And so I having purchased a number of houses myself, those are relevant factors for me. I purchased one in a flood zone, a 100-year flood zone, and that made an influence about how much I was wanting to pay for that property. So similar, the no complaints, an argument has been around tenants. If you have a tenant that is to occupy a property, then they may or may not be aware of that covenant, but realistically, it's something that's placed over the whole environment.
Obviously, Rolleston has grown significantly, and when the resource recovery park was put in place, the land around it was well removed from what you call general residential. In terms of the planning decisions around that, do you think it's fair to say that it was placed there because it did have that removal from residential? And obviously there is.
Sorry, Commissioner, I'm not sure that's a question this witness is qualified to answer. It's not representing the council.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit more of a planning question for me rather than. Yeah.
Well, I guess the point I do understand that is that if you are looking at potentially odor producing activities, you generally look to a site which has reasonable separation.
Yeah,
it's probably, I do respect that. It's probably not you can't answer that. It's more for a council infrastructure, but you have been involved in a number of different, presumably site selection facilities for site selection activities for potential facilities where odor may or may not be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I often work for developers who are looking to develop an odor producing activity. I'm currently working on 3 or 4 different composting plants around New Zealand, alongside many other discharges associated with odor. And part of that assessment that we're looking at is that separation distance. It's quite clear that from the science that the further you get away from a receptor, the less likely that odor is going to travel to that receptor. You'll have seen in my evidence that we generally have a vast drop in intensity as you travel further from the site. And that's a sort of an exponential decay curve that's associated with that. So, and for those reasons, most developers and for that matter, councils look to put facilities that have the ability to discharge odor or dust or other pollutants to air far away from, or as far away from residential zones and or sensitive receptors as possible.
Thank
But,
you.
yeah.
No further question.
Yeah, just a question. Trees a good odor mitigation method? Planting trees.
Planting trees. So trees, it's very common again now for activities such as a composting operation or to put boundary planting of trees around the facility. They have a couple of benefits. One, the facility is screened from the public so that it's sort of out of sight, out of mind. Sometimes people can have a perception of an odor being unhealthy, and so not being able to see a facility helps to reduce that sort of perception of, you know, this odor is coming from this activity, and I can see it, so I don't, you know, I feel that that's sort of more offensive to me. The other aspect is associated with the actual dispersion of the wind, so, or the odor plume. So as the odor plume travels through, we deem it to be surface roughness as a factor that we use as a part of our assessments, and increasing the surface roughness increases the amount of turbulence of the air. As you get an odor plume gets more turbulence, then we adding more dilution or fresh air into that plume, which means that you dilute the plume. So there is some benefit that's associated with having planting around a facility, and you may have read in the evidence we talk a little bit about that forest, and there's a long way that odor plume would have to travel through sections of that forest, which means there's a lot of turbulence and mixing that would occur between the emission point and the nearest zone, it's land that's set aside to be zoned as residential. But there is also a condition in Selwyn's District Council's consent for the composting plant that requires them to have and maintain planting on the boundary. So regardless of whether or not that forest is there, they will have to have some form of planting along their boundaries.
So there's no miracle where the leaves absorb the odor or anything like that?
No, there isn't. There is some science about another chemical component, but I won't get into that.
Okay, thank you.
Just on that same issue, para 141, you mentioned that. Sorry, so just on that same issue, your para 141, where you mentioned the pine forest, are you aware of the ownership of that forest and its potential longevity?
Again, that's something that as a team we've looked to try to identify. My understanding is that it's set aside as a research a parcel of land for forestry purposes. You might see in the aerial photography there's a big circular set of planting in the middle, and my understanding is that's to look at the different ways that you could plant pine trees and how they might affect their growth. But I don't believe that there is any constraints over the land use that would ensure that it remains as a forestry research facility. Or at least we haven't been able to find any.
Yeah. And do you know who owns it?
My understanding is the Selwyn District Council owner.
Okay. Now, just in terms of the proposed wastewater treatment plant staging setback, did I hear you say to Commissioner Dash a figure of 1,000 metres, or did you mean to say 1,500 metres?
So for the for the composting plant.
I'm talking about the wastewater treatment plant.
Okay, yeah. So for the wastewater treatment plant, all the experts have agreed that there's a separation distance of 1,000 metres is appropriate. The 1,500 metre setback distance is associated with an agreement that council's wastewater team has had with the applicant, that the applicant won't build any new houses within that 1,500 metres until the council has obtained the consent for the full 120 PE. So that isn't an odour constrainment associated with that. It's just for the consenting process, which is a very short term. I think it goes through to December 2026.
Sorry, I couldn't hear your last couple of sentences.
Oh, sorry.
Speak louder.
Yeah, I'll just get closer. So that 1,500 metres is just associated with the consenting of the full 120,000 people equivalents, and will be dropped after that consent is either granted or I believe it's December 2026, whichever comes first. So it's a short-term aspect, and it's not something that's proposed to endure beyond that consenting process.
Okay. In the outline development plan that's attached to Mr. Compton Moen's evidence only shows the 1,500 metre staging setback. Is that, do you understand, are you aware of why the 1,000 metre setback from the wastewater treatment plant's not shown on that outline development plan, or is that a question for that witness?
There's no need for the 1,000 metre setback distance to be there because there is nothing, no part of this development is within 1,000 metres.
Okay.
So there's no line that needs to be there.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. And just in terms of no complaints covenants, I'm just wondering if your language when you responded to one of the questions earlier was correct in that regard. You said it's a form of mitigation, but it's not a form of mitigation, is it? It doesn't prevent the odour occurring, it just prevents people from complaining about it, which is not mitigation.
Yeah, you're more correct. That a better term would be to say that it's a protection against complaints. It provides some protection against complaints as opposed to direct mitigation from odour discharges. Yeah.
All right, and I'll just check them. Do you have any questions from the rebuttal evidence? No, I have no questions from the rebuttal evidence either. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're just saying they're all on their way, but I'm just saying which one's going to arrive first. You just want to go and see.
That's all right, we'll just wait.
Yeah.
They should only be fine.
You wanna come here?
We'll just see where Mr. Mathamo is. He lives locally, so.
We're just saying that John doesn't need to be here.
No, we've already indicated we had no questions, Mr. Sally. Thank you.
I'm sure he won't be offended.
What's what to talk about?
Do you want me to stick around?
No, you don't need to stick around. You don't know anything about this fossils, do you?
No. I don't want to know anything about
Apparently the three of
Yeah,
them in
good,
blank.
good, good, good.
Oh, can you go really? No, it's fine.
No, I think it. Jeremy, did you get an indication from Paul? I'm really having three.
These are obviously the first.
Oh, it's Mark gonna be here. You and Mark and Paul are getting the time. Yes, Victor. I don't know. Really don't want me to say. Um. Yeah.
That's correct, yes.
Obviously, given the topic being highly productive land, we didn't anticipate it in the beginning, obviously, because there is no highly productive land on the site. But here is a witness that you can talk about Rolleston generally.
Thank you. I don't think we'll do that, but Mr. Farmer, are you happy if we just proceed straight to any questions we have for you? We have read your rebuttal evidence, so no need for you to read that to us.
Yes.
All right, thank you. So Lindsay, you go first.
Thank you. I've only got one question. Your evidence is reasonably brief, and it's in terms of the land use classification system 1 to 3 and so forth. I'm not from Canterbury. In Canterbury, when were the last time that these were actively looked at and updated, particularly in view of the national policy statement, which has recently been promulgated?
It's been done progressively over the years.
Mm.
And for the most recent would be 2020. So at this stage, those classifications are quite conservative, and basically waiting for site specific to be done eventually.
So when you say they're conservative, does that mean that there's potential that class 2 could be class 1 land or class 2 could be class 3 land?
The latter.
The latter. So it tends to be, they make them better than they possibly are. Is that the way to put it?
So I've looked at a number of different sites within Selwyn over the last couple of months, and quite often at 3 becomes at 4. When there's a 1, sometimes that disappears, it becomes at 2 or 3.
Okay. And just for my own background, how do they go about assessing it? Do they do a bore or a test pit or something like that, then analyze the depth and the quantity of good soils?
So that's pretty much it. So the mapping that's been done that we have now is done on the regional level. Just looking at the potential soil types in an area and then giving it a land use classification. But the mapping that's required under the national policy statement requires site-specific, where you actually go and do some test pitting, look at the soil profile, look at the degree of stoniness, look at the soil depth, look at the soil texture in terms of water holding capacity and those kind of things.
And presume there is well-established industry methodology about how that's done.
It's reasonably well established, but can be a bit subjective as well. So you give it to 2 experts, and you'll find some subtle differences between them. but nothing that the two can sit down and work through and come to a reasonable agreement on.
Thank you. No further.
Thanks. Raymond?
Sorry. You've stated what factors determine land use classification. Are those factors likely to change?
No, they're basically the same. They're going to be the same right through. You then have site-specific issues. The broad classes or factors are the same, and then within a site, you like degree of stoniness. That's a judgment call, which is why I was saying to the commissioner that you might get two experts and they give you two different answers because of those site-specific subtle differences, but the broad parameters are basically the same.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I said one question in your paragraph 11, and it's about the water supply issue.
Yeah.
And obviously from your preceding paragraphs, it appears there's sufficient volume allocated in the existing consents to provide for the proposed development. In terms of the increased peak flow rate required, and Ms. Appleyard, I'm happy for you to bounce this to another witness if that's more appropriate. Has there been any discussion with the regional council about that? How likely is that to be approved? Are you aware at all?
No specific discussions, but it's just a procedural issue. So the maximum flow rate you can take out of any bore is determined by the possible effects on neighboring bores.
Yeah.
So say this proposal needed 200 liters per second out of a bore, and when you do the assessment of effects and you find that you're affecting the neighboring bores, you can scale that back to say 150. But because this water can be taken anywhere within Rolleston, the remaining 50 liters could be taken on another part of town and all feeds into the same network.
Right.
Yeah, so it's just a procedural thing, site-specific assessment of effects and possible effects on the neighboring bores.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in terms of avoiding any drawdown effects, it'll just be a matter of drilling a new bore in a different location within the development somewhere. Would it?
Exactly, yeah.
Either a new bore or a series of bores.
One or more bores to get that total flow rate that you require. Because ultimately that total flow rate is going to be given to Selwyn District Council. So it's just a matter of working with them where within Rolleston that can be made up from.
Yeah. All right, thank you. That's the only question I wanted to ask you.
Thank you so much.
Just to keep things moving, Mr. Farrelly thought he might appear on Zoom rather than getting in the car, if that's
Yeah, of course.
acceptable. So we're just going to text him and he will.
He's just joining us. Oh, yeah.
Okay, we might as well do phone.
Yeah, yeah. Don't see anyone in the lobby.
Seems to be having trouble getting on. We can start with Mr. McLeod if you want to. We'll give him another few minutes. And,
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got Mr. McLeod and Mr. Taylor's in the car at the moment. and Mr. Farrelly, yeah.
He said he's just found a room and looking on it. So I can. No. I think he's in the lobby, Heather. Just waiting to be let in the Zoom. Yes. He's-
Oh,
Hello.
hi, thank you for accommodating us. It's, my poor timetabling that
Some reason?
we're ahead of ourselves.
All right, good afternoon, Mr. Farrelly. Again, yes, thank you for coming in this afternoon on Zoom for us. Now, we've read your evidence. You provided evidence in chief and no rebuttal evidence, just confirming that. Are you happy if we go straight to questions? We have read the evidence, so there's no need for you to read it out loud to us again. Is that suitable from your point of view?
I'm going to try another device. One moment.
We'll see if you can do this quicker than driving here.
Can you just get the chat here to turn his mic?
Right, I'm on. Again, I don't seem to be able to pick up any sound at your end.
It's because we haven't said anything yet. Can you hear us now?
I can, sorry. Yep, that's good.
All right, I'll just say good afternoon, Mr. Farrelly. Thank you for appearing over Zoom this afternoon. We've read your evidence in chief, just confirming that you didn't provide any rebuttal evidence. Are you happy for us to go straight to questions? We have read the evidence, so there's no need for you to read it out loud to us. Does that suit you?
That's fine, yep.
All right, so we'll start with Commissioner Solomon. Any questions for Mr. Farrelly?
Yes. Is that better? You can hear me now?
I can, yep.
Good afternoon. I'm referring to your paragraph 16 of your evidence, where you talk about solar PV uptake not able to be installed on multi-level homes and multi-density zones. Do you know of any designs for medium density multi-level homes where the design is such that allows for the efficient use of solar paneling?
Well, you can put solar panels on a multi-story building, but I guess the ratio of the roof space to the usable area, the energy consuming area, is much lower than it is on a single story house.
Okay, thank you. And just on your paragraph 72 onwards, actually, and it's probably perhaps not a question for you, but I'll ask it anyway. Is there any commitment by the developer to incorporate energy efficiency measures into its residential activities and still keep the homes affordable, to keep power costs down, particularly for those ones who need it most?
I think that's a question for the developer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farrelly. I've only got one question, and it's more for a little bit more of my background, etc., in terms of EV. In your summary, paragraph 20, you say that the uptake of EVs will be much faster in a commuter belt areas such as Rolleston.
Yes.
Is that a longer term thing, or is that now? I thought the uptake of EVs was because there was such a price differential with the petrol diesel fleet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess it comes down to the economics really of the benefit of having an EV is that obviously the operational cost is lower per kilometre travelled. So the more kilometres that one travels, the better the economic case for converting to an EV will be to overcome that price differential that you've alluded to. So I hypothesize that if you were to commute 30 kilometres or so into work, that you would benefit more from having an EV than someone that was traveling a much shorter distance. So that's my rationale there.
So are you talking medium term? You're talking 5 years out rather than now, or just
well,
immediately?
I actually think it works now, to be honest. So if you were, but it's a function of how many kilometres you are intending to drive each year. But there's definitely some modelling that we've done where we think that over a 5-year period, you'll be better off buying a new EV if you're commuting a reasonable distance.
Okay.
Now we make some assumptions about resale value in that modelling as well.
So has it moved on, certainly recently, from just being a trendy to have to being economically a sensible thing to do?
I believe so. I mean, the latest statistics that I think relate to December were that 20% of new vehicle purchases were, so it's 25% of essentially cars were fully electric during December. That's the highest month that we've had. So that's a quarter of all new cars, and I think it's 20% across the full fleet. So that includes all different types of vehicles. So we're seeing some pretty significant uptake on obviously on new vehicles. It will take time to filter through into the second-hand market, but we're importing second-hand EVs new as well at a pretty high rate. So I think that trend will just continue.
All right, I've got no further questions. Thank you, Chair.
Just your paragraph 15, you mentioned 3 factors. Just let me find it. So you got your paragraph 15 there?
Yes.
Yeah, so you mentioned energy efficient homes, elimination of natural gas LPG, and encouraging high uptake of solar panels. Are those 3 matters being proposed in this development, do you know? Or is that a question for someone else?
I believe that's a question again for the developer.
No, that's also, Ms. Ebel, can we have someone answer that question for us? And then just turning to your para 121.
Yep.
You talk about level Z zoning and level 3 zoning. We're dealing with the proposed district plan, so we're more familiar with terms like general residential zoning and large lot residential zone. So what does that paragraph mean? Level Z
Okay.
versus level 3, what does that mean?
So my understanding is that the current zoning for the I think it's PC 73 sites is essentially low density residential. That's how I view it anyway. So essentially you could have much larger lot sizes, like essentially lifestyle blocks, whereas the proposed is a higher density model. So if we're thinking about, I guess, emissions per capita or per resident, if we're talking about large blocks of land with a significant amount of infrastructure to get, roads developed, lighting, all that sort of stuff, it's roughly the same amount of infrastructure required for a very small number of residents as there is for a much larger number of residents. So from an emissions point of view, you're better off to have a denser development than a less dense development, which is what the current zoning allows for. I don't have the specifics of the zoning rules in front of me, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. All right, thank you. I think that's all we have for you. So thank you for coming in.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Would you like the question answered by the developer while we're on this topic? Mr. Carter was giving evidence, so he has already given his evidence, and you indicated no questions, but you do have. So Mr. Carter, the question is from the chair, and I'm reading Mr. Farrelly's paragraph 15. Lifetime energy uses emissions from standalone homes can be minimised through the specification of energy efficient homes, the elimination of natural gas LPG developments, and encouraging a high uptake of solar PV panels. So the question was around your appetite for that specification.
We're very interested in our developments being as environmental friendly as possible, and we'd do that by agreement, or we could do that by requirements in terms of covenants when we sell. We would like to keep some flexibility, so we make sure that the covenants are up to date, as it takes a period of time to develop out the land that we're seeking rezoning for.
Yep. So just for my clarification, was that a yes?
Yes.
And that might have answered Commissioner Solomon's question as well.
Yep. No, thank you for that.
Mr. McLeod.
So good afternoon and welcome, Mr. McLeod. I think you also have provided evidence in chief, but no rebuttal evidence. Just that's correct.
That's correct.
Yes. And then we've read your evidence. Are you happy if we go to questions, or if it's your preference, you can highlight key points for us, but we have read the material.
Yeah, we can go straight to questions. That's fine.
Great. Thank you very much. And Raymond.
Yes.
Sorry, what considerations are accounted for in regards to water quality and ecosystem health when managing the raceways? Now, I know the councils manage the raceways, but I just thought you might know that answer.
From managing water quality, from a council point of view, it's mostly about keeping stock out of the water race. If you're doing an urban development, then you can either incorporate it as part of the landscaping, or you could actually close the water race, and that's a better way of protecting the water quality in the race. Just close it. It's not the water race. Just it stops within the development before Selwyn Road, so it doesn't need to continue to any downstream users. So there's no reason why it couldn't be closed, and that protects the water.
Does it protect the habitat in the water?
You'll be destroying that particular habitat. Yeah.
I've got some questions for Mr. Taylor around that, so thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. McLeod. Your paragraph 15, when you talk about the potential for increasing the capacity of the wastewater treatment plant. Now, I realise Mr. England's not here, but you have referred to him in there that it's been funded to take it up to 120,000 persons capacity. From your knowledge, and presumably you've had discussions with Mr. England, what is the current time frame that the council is looking at for implementing the capacity upgrade?
Yeah, my understanding is that the work's underway already to get it up to the 60,000
Yeah,
persons equivalent, and then it's in the long-term plan. So in the next 3 to 5 years, they're putting in the works to expand it to the 120.
okay, so it's within the lifetime of the next 10 years,
Yeah, so that
120.
yeah, I think the expansion would be in a similar time frame to development of the subdivision.
Yeah,
Yeah, by the time you factor in the design, consenting, civil works, construction, and then building of the houses, yeah, that's a similar time frame.
so what does the actual upgrade entail? Is it more like yes, or is it more land, or is it a combination of
No,
both?
it's essentially more kit. So they've got to build more components,
Yeah.
essentially doubling the components that are already there. So they're duplicating the various stages of the treatment process.
Okay. And I take it as your conclusion on all the other matters that there are no infrastructure impediments to development of the land.
Not really.
No insurmountable infrastructure impediments to.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And in terms of, yes, there is work that needs to be, or pre-work that needs to be done outside of the subdivision, but that can all happen within a suitable time frame to meet the demand of the oncoming subdivision.
Okay, thank you.
And just on that same topic, in your para 15, so I'm just waiting to attend to that. You got that there?
I've got that.
Yeah.
there. Yep.
Cool. So you say there, planned upgrades to the wastewater treatment plant already underway to bring it up to 60,000. And you then say the 120,000 capacity is identified and funded as described in the wastewater activity management plan. How does that differ from annual plan or long-term financial plan?
I believe that it's the wastewater activity management plan. That's part of the council's long-term
That's
planning.
part of the-
Yeah, it's one of their planning
Okay.
documents. Yeah.
All right. Just one further question at the bottom of your para 18. And so the upgrades, and correct me if I got this wrong, correct, the upgrades currently underway, 60,000 required to deal with connections from Darfield and Leaston. Is that what your evidence is saying there?
That's correct. Yep.
So if that's the case, is any of that capacity available for this development in front of us?
That's a good question. I think Mr. England's probably in a better position to answer that one.
Okay. Right, thank you. They're the only 2 matters I wanted to ask you about. So thanks very much for coming in.
Okay, no problem.
We'll see how far away Mr. Taylor is on his way.
All right, we'll resume the hearing and Mr. Taylor, is it?
Yes,
Yes, good afternoon and welcome.
Good
Thank you
afternoon.
for coming in this afternoon. I've been saying this to all the witnesses today. We have read the evidence. It's been pre-circulated, so there's no need to read it out loud to us. So we are happy to go straight to questions, but if you'd like to highlight key points, you're welcome to do so.
Which would you prefer to do? Are you happy to answer questions or would you like to read the summary?
I'll read my summary. This one is sure.
Mr. Taylor, the handout we've just received, has that changed at all from your pre-circulated summary?
I made a slight revision from the earlier draft, but this is my final one now. Yes.
Okay, so what's changed from the pre-circulated evidence?
I've just added a few comments here in respect to the waterway physical habitat.
All right, so I will need a copy of that.
Think of those. Okay. Okay, so I'll start on paragraph 2. So there is a water race located on the site, which currently has some reaches providing a compromised environment due to intermittent fencing and in places stock accelerated bank erosion. In other reaches, for example, on Plan Change Area 82 and parts of PC 73, the waterway was fenced and the banks were vegetated and stable. However, I do not consider that exists any ecological reasons which would lead to the decline of this rezoning request for the land west of Duns Crossing Road. I consider that any adverse ecological effects of the requested rezoning of the land can or will be avoided, remedied or mitigated to an acceptable standard. To the contrary, development of plans to manage the waterway in parallel with the land zoning change has every chance to enhance the aquatic ecology and amenity values for these plan change areas. This enhancement and ecological protection will require ecological assessment before early works and development. The peer review of my ecological assessment for PC 73 by Dr. Greg Burrows on behalf of the council accepted my conclusions that any ecological effects will be appropriately avoided, remedied or mitigated, subject to the water races remaining open and fishing kakihi, freshwater mussels, salvage being conducted prior to any works within the water races.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor.
Sure.
Commissioner Solomon has some questions for you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Taylor. Under your paragraph 16 of your evidence in chief, you talk about conservation values. What determines fish to have a conservation value?
Well, largely their conservation status, but also their cultural value as well, the hamakai. So in this case, it might include tuna, freshwater mussels.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. With regard to raceway management being the reason for the state of the water race, you've described that in paragraph 16 as not being well looked after. That's not the exact words, but how do we know it will be managed any better in the future?
Paragraph 16.
Yes.
It'll be managed better partly through stability of the banks and development of a riparian strip, which will facilitate ecological chaining between the waterway and the roosting areas for insects.
So that's part of the development?
It will be, yeah, there will be a development setback.
Great, thank you. Now, again, at your paragraph 16, as per policy 1, ESUD policy 1, has the proposal considered fencing off and planting the riparian margin of, oh, you just answered that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I realised. Here we go. With regard to Kihi to Kitai and connections, mountains to the sea, and freshwater coda or Kikiwai, and Tuna and Mine, could the raceway and the Homes block in the past have connected with the Scalarup Raceway waterway?
Let's have a look at my irrigation map.
I know it's connected by the irrigation system, but
Yes.
I just wonder if it's more natural. It'd be more natural.
I wouldn't have thought so. To be honest, I don't think there's any natural fluvial connection,
Okay.
to be honest, but
Not having seen the sites and not knowing the context, I'm just asking these questions from what I've read. And I want to go now to your aquatic ecology report. Sure, I see that Kikiwai were found in the Scalarup Raceway. Scalarup, the raceway in the Scalarup block, according to your report.
is it, sorry, which block's the Scalarup South block, PC 81?
No,
No.
PC 73, Scalarup.
So I read it in your ecological report attached to your evidence.
Haven't been in there.
Short fin eels were perhaps were caught in the Homes block
Oh,
and Kikiwai
suspected.
in the Scalarup block. Or freshwater coda.
Is this, so which part of the report are we looking at? Do you have a page number?
Third paragraph of
Which attachment?
the ecological report.
Isn't the letter dated 29th September?
I'll go and find it. I just
Oh,
thought I'd
okay.
mention it anyway.
Okay, that's fine. I think you're referring possibly to table 1.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's possible fishes. So that's based on our work in the area.
Okay.
So there's the potential to hold those particular species.
And cultural values are known all days.
Having said that, I'd be surprised to find many long finial penetrating that far up from the Waimak.
Yeah.
What we find is quite high numbers of upland bully, which spawn locally. And also brown trout. There's some of the raceways have the potential for brown trout spawning.
So with as far as connectivity, did the development or does the proposal take in connectivity of fish?
Connectivity.
Yes, like its ability to go to swim to the ocean to spawn.
There's no downstream connectivity. The raceway terminates at the end of plan change 81.
So there's just
So
a little raceway, a water body with no end, no beginning.
No, the intake is up at the Waimak River. Okay, and then it flows south, right around the outskirts of Christchurch, and terminates towards Selwyn Road
Okay,
as an irrigation race.
okay. Okay. I have no more questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And Ms. Taylor, neither I nor Commissioner Dash have any further questions for you, but thank you for your evidence.
Okay, thank you.
So if we could just now confirm the witnesses who will be appearing tomorrow, and do you have an order?
Yes, so, Mr. Conrad and Mr. Sellers.
And so they'll be up first, is that?
I'll just come to that in a minute. Mr.
Yep.
Compton-Meyer and Ms.
Wait a minute, slow down. So Sellers, Colgrave,
Mr. Compton-Meyer and Ms. Rolleston.
Yep.
And then Mr. Phillips.
Yeah.
How are you getting on with contact? So Ms. Lowestone's in Germany, 12-hour time difference, so we asked her whether she could be available earlier. But she reflected at the moment, so I can confirm that. So I suppose the two options are either to push Mr. Colgrave and Mr. Sellers later, or just hope that Ms. Rolleston wakes up and.
Yep.
come with it.
So just. We'll commence at 9 o'clock and we'll hear from the four remaining witnesses, Mr. Sellers, Colgrave, Compton Moen and Mr. Phillips as the sweeper. Great, thank you. So now we're adjourned for today and we'll reconvene tomorrow.